The sea was calm, the air beat with cold, and visibility was poor. Then, in a matter of seconds, a thunderous flash tore through the gray horizon. What had been one of the most powerful warships ever built simply vanished, ripped apart by an explosion so violent that it seemed to silence the ocean itself. When the smoke cleared, more than 1,000 men were gone, swallowed by the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. This was not a long battle. It was not a drawn-out duel of endurance or maneuver. It was a brutal reminder that modern naval warfare no longer offered second chances. Steel, fire, and human lives were decided in minutes, sometimes seconds. Across the ocean, the shock was immediate. The loss struck at the heart of a nation that had long believed its navy was untouchable. Pride turned into fury, and fury hardened into resolve. Somewhere far from the wreckage, a single order was issued, short, uncompromising, and absolute. One ship had to be found. One ship had to be destroyed. But this was more than a pursuit. It was a test of strategy, technology, and judgment. A clash between old assumptions and a rapidly changing reality of war at sea. The battleship did not emerge from the shipyard as merely another weapon of war. She was conceived as a statement. When construction began, Germany was still bound, at least on paper, by naval treaties meant to prevent another arms race at sea. Yet beneath the surface, ambition quietly overran restraint. What slid down the ways was not a compliant design, but a floating expression of national resolve, built heavier, longer, and more powerful than officially admitted. Her dimensions reflected those ambitions. She carried massive guns, meant to dominate any duel and armor arranged to absorb punishment that would cripple lesser ships. On paper, she was nearly unsinkable. In practice, however, early trials revealed an unsettling truth. Steering by engines alone was unreliable, especially at speed. Engineers worked feverishly to correct the flaw, but time pressed harder than steel. Delays piled up canals blocked by wrecks, harbors jammed with traffic, ice choking northern waterways. Weeks became months, and frustration grew aboard a ship that was ready to fight but trapped at the pier. By the time she was finally commissioned, the broader naval picture had changed. Germany's surface fleet was not winning control of the seas. Earlier raiders were damaged or bottled up in occupied ports. Reinforcements existed only on paper. Direct confrontation with the world's largest navy was not an option. Strategy shifted accordingly. Instead of decisive battles, the focus turned to commerce raiding, striking supply lines, bleeding the enemy slowly, and forcing a response on unfavorable terms. This mission was built around that idea. The plan was deceptively simple. Break into the Atlantic, avoid major enemy warships, rendezvous with pre-positioned supply vessels, and then attack convoys with near impunity. Success depended not on brute force, but on speed, secrecy, and discipline. Yet even before departure, cracks were visible. Senior commanders expressed doubts, arguing that the operation should wait until additional ships could join. The answer from above was unequivocal. Delay was no longer acceptable. The ship would sail ready or not. On a grey morning in mid-May 1941, she finally left port, accompanied by a heavy cruiser and a small escort. The route chosen reflected the risk. The English Channel was too exposed, too closely watched. Instead, the squadron crept north, hugging neutral coastlines, relying on poor weather and long nights to stay hidden. Their objective lay beyond the narrow gap of the Denmark Strait, one of the last stretches of ocean where Allied surveillance remained thin. But secrecy is fragile at sea. Even before the Atlantic was reached, watchful eyes noticed movement. A neutral observer reported the sighting. Aircraft followed. Radio transmissions, unnecessary and careless, confirmed what the enemy already suspected. Each signal chipped away at the veil of invisibility. By the time the ships turned toward open water, the operation had already shifted. What was meant to be a stealthy breakout was becoming a race, one in which every mile gained was shadowed by the growing certainty that they were no longer alone. By the morning of May 23, the sea itself seemed to conspire against clarity. Thick mist clung to the Denmark Strait, reducing visibility to a few miles at best. Icebergs drifted without warning, forcing abrupt course changes. It was an unforgiving environment, but also the kind of chaos that could conceal movement if discipline held. Inside the battleship, preparations intensified. Gun crews drilled in freezing winds. Engineers monitored propulsion systems around the clock, fully aware that even a minor mechanical failure could doom the mission. Radar operators scanned relentlessly, knowing the enemy might already be closer than anyone wanted to admit. They were, Late that evening,
I see it. Get me a
British
confirmation on
cruisers
that
began
bearing
to
now.
appear on radar ghostly signatures just beyond visual range. Shadowing tactics were textbook. Stay distant, avoid direct engagement, and report constantly. When the German guns finally roared, their thunder shook steel and sea alike. Shells tore across the water, forcing the cruisers to retreat behind smoke screens. But the damage was already done. Contact had been made. Silence was broken. The hunt was on. At dawn on May 24, dark shapes emerged through the haze. Two British capital ships closed fast, their bows cutting white scars across the cold Atlantic. Within minutes, both sides were at battle stations. The opening salvos echoed across the strait, flashes illuminating the mist like distant lightning. The engagement unfolded with brutal speed. The British advanced head-on, limiting their own firepower in an attempt to close the range quickly. The Germans, positioned broadside, unleashed full salvos. Shells fell closer with each exchange, towering columns of water crashing back onto steel decks. Then came the moment that would define the entire campaign. A shell plunged downward, piercing armor, reaching deep into the ship's core. The explosion that followed was instantaneous and catastrophic. Fire tore through internal spaces, detonating stored ammunition. In seconds, a ship that symbolized decades of naval dominance simply ceased to exist. The sea closed over the wreckage, leaving debris, smoke, and silence where power had stood moments before. The psychological impact was immediate. Shock rippled through both fleets. For the British, disbelief gave way to grim determination. For the Germans, triumph was tempered by urgency. The battle was not over, and the enemy still had teeth. Attention turned to the remaining British battleship. She fought stubbornly, landing several hits despite mechanical failures and overwhelming fire. But the imbalance was clear. When shells struck her bridge, withdrawal became the only option. Victory, however, was incomplete. Below the waterline, unseen damage was spreading. A shell had ruptured fuel tanks. Oil leaked steadily into the sea, marking a dark trail that no amount of speed could erase. As the German ships turned south, slowing slightly, that trail stretched behind them like a signal flare. The clash had lasted barely 20 minutes. Nearly 100 heavy shells had been fired. One legendary ship was gone. Yet, as the guns fell silent, it was clear that the engagement had not secured freedom, it had merely accelerated the chase. What followed would prove that a single triumph, no matter how dramatic, could never outweigh the consequences of one critical mistake. The battle had been won, but the sea told a different story. As the ships turned south, speed was no longer what it had been minutes earlier. Below the waterline, damage spread quietly. Fuel tanks had been ruptured, and oil seeped steadily into the Atlantic, forming a long, dark stain that stretched behind the retreating battleship. What could not be seen from the bridge was already visible from the sky. At first, there was hope. For several tense hours, the ship seemed to slip free into the vastness of the ocean. The Atlantic was enormous, and a single vessel, no matter how wounded, could still vanish if luck held. But modern war left little room for luck. A patrol aircraft spotted the unmistakable smear of oil and radioed the sighting. British cruisers, never truly far away, closed the distance once more. In London, the response was immediate and absolute. Every available ship was redirected. Battleships abandoned convoys. Carriers altered course. Destroyers burned precious fuel at full speed. This was no longer a tactical pursuit. It was a national imperative. The sea lanes, morale, and credibility of an empire were at stake. Aboard the fleeing ship, commanders faced a brutal reality. The original plan, raiding convoys, operating freely, choosing when to fight, was gone. Now the objective was survival. Course was set toward occupied France, where air cover and friendly ports promised refuge. But the damage made that race uneven. Flooding forced constant adjustments. Fuel consumption rose sharply. Every hour reduced the margin for escape. Then came the fatal decision, breaking radio silence. A detailed transmission was sent to headquarters, reporting position, damage, and intentions. It was meant to inform and coordinate. Instead, it betrayed. British listening stations intercepted the signal almost instantly. Direction-finding equipment fixed the location, calculated the heading, and confirmed the destination. The fog of war lifted not through gunfire, but through electromagnetic whispers across the sea. As night fell, torpedo bombers attacked. The first strike jolted the ship but failed to cripple her. Anti-aircraft fire roared into the darkness, and the attackers withdrew. For a moment, it seemed the worst had passed. But the ocean remained unforgiving. With each mile, the imbalance grew. British forces faced their own problems. Ships low on fuel, crews exhausted, weather deteriorating, but momentum had shifted.
The fleet presses north from Gibraltar, straight into the teeth of the Atlantic storm.
The carrier group raced north from Gibraltar, closing the trap. Inside the wounded hull, the mood changed. Damage control teams fought water and fire without rest. Men worked soaked and sleepless, knowing the ship could no longer dictate her own fate. Steering became erratic. Speed dropped. The sense of isolation was complete. What had begun as a calculated breakout had transformed into a slow, grinding countdown. The battleship was no longer the hunter. She was a moving target, marked by oil, tracked by radio, and hemmed in by forces converging from every direction. The decisive blow had not yet fallen, but the path toward it was now unavoidable. The sea had chosen, and there would be no more room to maneuver. The decisive moment did not come from a battleship's guns. It arrived from the air, carried beneath the wings of slow, fabric-covered aircraft that looked obsolete even by the standards of 1941. This contrast would not be lost on naval thinkers across the world, especially in the United States. When torpedo bombers launched from the carrier Ark Royal, few would have predicted their impact. They flew low, slow, and exposed, battered by wind and anti-aircraft fire. Yet their weakness was also their strength. Flying beneath radar coverage and maneuvering close to the waves, they exploited a vulnerability no amount of armor could fully protect. One torpedo struck near the stern, jamming the rudder. In that instant, the balance of power shifted irreversibly. From a strategic perspective, this was a watershed. A single hit did what hours of heavy gunfire could not. It removed mobility. The battleship could still fight, but she could no longer choose where or how. Control of the engagement passed to the attackers, not through superior firepower, but through superior integration of air and sea operations. For American naval planners observing from across the Atlantic, the implications were unmistakable. The era of the lone capital ship dominating the seas was ending. Aircraft carriers, reconnaissance, and coordinated strike groups were no longer supporting elements. They were becoming decisive instruments of naval power. Mobility, information, and reach mattered more than armor thickness or gun caliber. This lesson would echo loudly in the Pacific only months later. The logic was the same. A powerful fleet that could not protect itself from air attack was fundamentally vulnerable. No ship, regardless of size or reputation, could operate independently in contested waters. Globally, the sinking V-shaped strategy, Germany effectively abandoned surface fleet operations, shifting its focus almost entirely to submarines. Britain, though victorious, absorbed the cost and the warning. Naval supremacy was not guaranteed by tradition or prestige, but by adaptability. The battle demonstrated something deeper than technological change. It revealed how quickly assumptions could become liabilities. Confidence hardened into rigidity. Doctrine lagged behind reality. And when those gaps were exposed, even the mightiest symbols of power could be reduced to wreckage. For the modern world, the lesson remains painfully relevant. Wars are not decided by what a nation believes to be invincible, but by how well it anticipates the next evolution of conflict and how willing it is to abandon old certainties before they become fatal. Morning broke over the Atlantic under grey skies and heavy seas. The ship that once embodied power now struggled simply to remain afloat. Unable to steer, battered by waves, and surrounded on all sides, the outcome was no longer in doubt. When the first shells struck at close range, they did not bring drama so much as inevitability. Fire tore through steel already weakened. Gun turrets fell silent one by one. Command and control vanished in minutes. What followed was not a heroic last stand, but a grim conclusion. Orders were given below deck to abandon damage control and prepare the ship for scuttling. Explosive charges were set. As shells continued to fall, water rushed through open compartments. When the final torpedoes struck, the great hull rolled and disappeared beneath the waves. In just over an hour, a symbol of naval ambition was gone. Survival came down to chance. Hundreds entered the freezing water with little hope of rescue. Some were pulled aboard enemy ships, only for the effort to be cut short by the threat of submarines. Others were never seen again. From a crew numbering more than 2,000, barely over 100 lived to tell the story. The ocean,
now just another victim of the relentless
indifferent and
Atlantic.
vast,
The sea, an
claimed the
indifferent,
rest.
silent enemy.
The strategic consequences were immediate. In Berlin, confidence
divisions are
collapsed
left,
into caution. Surface fleet operations were effectively halted. Capital ships remained in harbor, no longer risked in direct combat. Germany's naval war shifted decisively beneath the surface, where submarines, not battleships, would carry the burden. Across the Channel, the reaction was more restrained. Victory came at a cost, few celebrated. The loss of life on both sides underscored the brutal arithmetic of modern warfare. The lesson was not triumph, but warning. Technology evolves faster than doctrine. Prestige cannot compensate for vulnerability.
A single
Even the most
fate.
formidable
The
weapons
magazine
can be
detonation broke
undone
the
by a
vessel's back,
single
sealing its fate
overlooked
beneath the
weakness.
waves.
The legacy of this campaign endures not because of its firepower, but because of what it revealed. War does not reward arrogance. It punishes rigidity, and it remembers mistakes longer than victories. The wreck now rests far below the surface, unseen and silent. Yet its story still rises whenever nations place faith in invincibility rather than adaptation.
We still don't know why they were positioned here, so far from the main line.
The question remains open and urgent. Have we truly learned when to let go of the weapons we believe cannot fail?